And when players are encouraged to branch out and experience different parts of it, we think that makes the experience richer and, dare I say it, even more fun for everybody.
Definitely agree, Ian. I'm sure a lot of people don't, but I definitely agree.
Okay. Now, it would be impossible and, in fact, irresponsible to engage in any kind of philosophical discussion around community feedback without digging into the topic of class design. Now, we've been hearing, really for years now, since Warlords and Legion, a steady amount of feedback from the community about the direction of class design, and with a particular focus on the topic of so-called class pruning, and the removal of abilities in many cases, or moving abilities from baseline to spec-specific, or moving them to other systems like PvP talents. And while at its core we do think that there was a lot of good work done there in terms of removing redundant abilities, pulling back from some homogenization that led to nearly every class and spec having multiple forms of crowd control or utility that actually hurt class uniqueness, a consistent point of feedback has been the concern that we've gone too far. And after a lot of reflection and ongoing discussion, ultimately I would like to say that we agree with that feedback. There are places where, in Warlords and in Legion, we were probably too focused on button count as a measure of complexity.
It's embarrassing.
When I think there's a lot more nuance to it than that. And that led to us pulling back a bit farther than we probably ought to have. And so as we engage in discussions about the future of class design, as we look beyond, current content updates to future expansion and even beyond, and we're asking what we want to do, where we want to take classes next, that feedback that we've heard really helps shape those discussions in a lot of ways. And so we look at some abilities that we removed that reduced overall button count, but actually probably did more harm than good in the act of taking them away. One example that comes to mind for me is something like Alter Time for mages, which was a fun, super flavorful and thematic ability that allowed for some masterfully skillful plays, also allowed for some masterfully skillful ways of getting yourself killed if you misused it. A lot of players probably ignored that ability. If you looked at it, you're like, I'm not totally sure when and where I'd want to use this. That was fine. Many players probably didn't even have it bound.
I hated the ability, but
it was realizations like that that led to us removing it. But I'm not sure that mages are better or more fun, or that WoW class design as a whole is better for not having Altered Time somewhere in the mix.
Definitely agree.
Now, that ability is not going to come back tomorrow, but it's the exact kind of thing that we are talking about in terms of what direction we want to head in the longer term.
Good. It's fucking good.
Of course, there are also some more challenging areas of discussion where there are no quick fixes or solves. We look at something like warrior stances, and certainly as we've been going back and diving into Classic along with the rest of you, there's no question there was something thematic and unique about stance swapping and the way that whole system played out originally. But I think at this point, even when stances were around, they hadn't been required to use abilities for quite a long time. There's a certain point where we think it would likely be too jarring for a bunch of warriors to log in one day and discover that you actually can't pummel unless you're in the appropriate stance, or that you can't charge or or hamstring or the like.
See, this is exactly what I was talking about in the video I made yesterday. The game's just gotten too many changes for them to do exactly what they want with it. It's such a shame. It really is such a shame. It's such a shame to describe how great and how unique warrior stances were, and then be like, it's been too long since they've been important. People will be upset. It's such a shame.
But how can we offer a sense of, identity? How can we offer a sense of uniqueness that goes along with what that used to represent? Those are the sorts of questions that we're asking.
It's going to be a hard question
to answer. Speaking of identity, I think we've talked a lot about class identity in the foregoing years. But reflecting on those efforts, there are ways in which we've probably actually furthered spec identity at the expense of class identity in some cases.
Jesus, definitely.
As we moved abilities from class-wide to being spec-specific in a number of cases, we've perhaps gone a bit too far away from that core choice that players make when they're looking at character creation, looking at character select, and they decide whether they want to be a mage or a hunter or a shaman or a rogue. And then, ideally, specialization should truly be just that. It should be taking a class and picking a facet of it that excites you the most, with which you identify the most, and doubling down on that and becoming a master of that. Instead, for many classes or some specs, that choice entails almost turning into an all-new class with entirely different abilities and only a little bit of overlap.
He's very right about that.
And that's an area where we actually would like to also pull back from.
That's good to
So
hear that.
as we think to the future, we want to find ways of reestablishing class as a foundation, whether that's
awesome.
taking some abilities that are now spec-specific
It's so
and spreading them
fucking
back out so that the entire class has access to them, even if they're kind of off-role for you. There's value in that hybridity and that utility. But also looking to all new systems that we introduce down the line and trying to anchor them at the level of class rather than spec.
That's so exciting.
Because, again, class identity means class identity, not spec identity. And really with
Hopefully that means I'll be able to use like DPS essences and shit as Blood DK in the future.
regard to that, we want to underscore the importance of class identity and class design to World of Warcraft. I think a point that players have made on many occasions is that, to many, the way your class plays and feels is essential. It's one of the most important things in World of Warcraft, period. Your class is the lens through which you view the world. It's how you interact with the world. It's how you engage with all of your enemies and your allies. And if you're playing a class that you don't feel is satisfying, a class whose fantasy doesn't resonate with you, that's absolutely going to hinder your enjoyment of all the rest of the world. And so it truly is a top priority for us. And I want to thank everyone, continue to thank you for your ongoing feedback.
Just roll
and
Blood DK.
yes, your criticism where appropriate. I think it's helped us to sharpen and focus our discussions around this topic. And it really is a powerful guide to us as we look to the future of World of Warcraft and class design in particular.
Oh,
And last but certainly not least, you can't talk about what's ahead for WoW this summer without talking about WoW Classic.